And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick here with Katie Greifeld, taking you through to that closing bell. It's a global simulcast. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, they join us now. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, our partnership with YouTube. Another wild day, Carol Massar, on Wall Street, but it actually started before the cash session back in the futures market in the wee hours of around 7 a.m. I know you were probably still asleep here. Markets were down.
On my second cup of coffee, dogs were walked. I was reading through the Bloomberg.
Took off for a rally.
Messaging with my producers. No, you're right. It was very different overnight and certainly early on. And then, you know, President, obviously, maybe some would say watching perhaps the markets, but we did get some commentary from the president on Truth Social. So kind of holding off, backing off on his ultimatum, if you will, to Iran. And so we've got now 5 days. So the clock is ticking, and we'll see whether or not there are talks going on. But risk on trade, guys, most names we are seeing in among the big caps, the S&P 500, they are higher today. Most equity names higher, but look at oil. We have Brent below $100 a barrel. Katie, 99.70 right now. WTI, 88.70. We had a great conversation with Jayati Bardwaj over at TD Securities a little earlier today, and she said, don't get excited so quickly here. Right. She sees like a real floor at $80 a barrel. She doesn't see us going back to $60 a barrel anytime soon.
We'll see. I do just want to point out gold down today 2%. Once again, this is a 9th straight day of losses for gold. That is your longest streak since October of 2023.
And just a reminder here, still no ceasefire. In fact, getting headlines right now out of Israel that the IDF is already detecting launches of missiles from Iran. So a situation that is still fluid. The Strait of Hormuz now closed for a 24th straight day. Wow. Meanwhile, investors are trying to hang their hats on optimism that, yes, maybe indeed there are talks and maybe we could see a ceasefire potentially sometime this week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average adding 600 points or 1.4%. The S&P up 75 points or 1.2%. The NASDAQ Composite adding 300 points or 1.4%. And the Russell 2000, that's your outperformer, about 56 points higher or 2.3%.
All right, we are definitely living from headline to headline on this U.S. war in Iran. Back to the S&P 500. Earlier today, we had more than 400 names to the upside. Katie, still about 382 gaining ground on this Monday. 120 to the downside, one unchanged.
Well, it was a perfect score when it comes to the sector picture. 11 out of 11 sectors in the green. Haven't seen that for quite a long time. Consumer discretionary leading the pack in terms of your percentage gain, higher by about 2.5%. Materials also 1.5% higher. So too was tech. Healthcare almost spoiled the picture. Healthcare as a sector higher by 0.03%, but the color is green, Carol, so it's going to count.
Wow, kind of love that. All green. I had a lot to choose from in terms of individual gainers, so let's get to it, folks. Two names, DraftKings and Flutter. Certainly some outperformance there in the trade. That has to do with these two names gaining after the Wall Street Journal reported that U.S. senators are set to introduce bipartisan legislation to ban sports bets on prediction markets. So this has certainly been giving the likes of DraftKings and Flutter kind of a run for their money. Now, the bill pertains to entities regulated by the CFTC, including prediction market exchanges, Kalshi and Polymarket, according to the newspaper. As I said, these two names, though, have been under some pressure as investors fret over the competitive threat posed by Kalshi and Polymarket, which have seen volumes tied to sporting events boom. So we're going to keep a watch on that one. DraftKings up more than 1% and Flutter up about 4.4%. Flip it on over to the cruise lines, also getting a kick to the upside, and they were among your top gainers in the S&P 500. Norwegian up more than 6%, and you're looking at more than 5.5% gains on both Carnival and Royal. And this basically has to do with what's going on, at least some of the headlines out of the president when it comes to the war in the Middle East and in Iran. President Trump backing off those threats. So we did see the whole travel sector actually gaining in today's session. So some optimism coming back. And then one more name I just want to throw into it is Palantir. That went up almost 6.8% in today's today's session. Top in the NASDAQ 100 as its Maven artificial intelligence system will reportedly become an official program of record for the Pentagon. You might remember on Friday, our own Katrina Manson, she's got a new book out that's all about Project Maven that's been developed over the last decade or so. She reported on Friday how the Pentagon intends to accelerate AI-enabled decision-making and put it at the heart of its ambition to link up sensors and shooters for combat operations. That was according to a policy memo seen by Bloomberg. So she kind of front run.
Very cool book,
Something
too.
like that. It is an incredible book about what the government's been working on.
Hey, how about some
What's the name
decliners?
of the
Not
book?
easy to find
It's called
today.
Project Maven.
Project Maven.
Katrina Manson, man.
She's
if you haven't
amazing.
talked to her, you should.
I haven't, but thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Let's start with Micron. Shares down 4.4% today, down for a third day in a row after the company last week reported CapEx for the year that was higher than analysts wanted to see, down more than 13.5% since those highs just after reporting last week. Also want to talk about shares of Pfizer, kind of hovering lower by about 0.7% for much of the session. That's where it finished. This after the company said its experimental Lyme vaccine was only 73% effective against Lyme disease. It's a lackluster result, as fewer than expected infections in the pivotal study made its potency hard to evaluate. There's currently no human vaccine for Lyme disease on the market. Also, late in trading, we saw FICO, Fair Isaac Corp shares take a hit today. This after Politico reported that the company is being queried by Senator Josh Hawley for its mortgage credit scoring. Look at this, down 5.7%. Politico reported on a letter that Senator Hawley sent to FICO that said, quote, "These price increases are most damaging to the Americans who can least afford them. First-time homebuyers bear a disproportionate burden of the cost." Once again, FICO shares falling by 5.7%. And a late ad, big thank you to the control room for throwing this one up there. Estee Lauder Company's shares late in the session down 7.7%.
This is
after the
amazing.
FT. This is wild. The FT reported the company's nearing a deal to combine with Puig Brands. It's a Spanish beauty firm. The transaction could be announced as soon as Monday, according to the newspaper who cited people familiar with the matter. Estee Lauder shares down 7.7% today.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, too. I was also curious as to why it dropped so much here. Obviously, we don't have all the details, but you also saw some of the other peers in that space get dragged down, like Cody. Meanwhile, we talk about the moves in the yield space here, and it was one of the most volatile days that we've seen in quite some time for Treasuries, if you can believe that. On a points basis, when you look at the two-year yield, we actually had the biggest one-day swing from peak to trough in two-year yields going all the way back to August 1st of last year. Down 11 points at one point, up 11 points at one point, closing out the day down by about 5 basis points here. Similar moves across the board here with your 10-year down about 3 basis points and your 30-year yield down about 2.
All right, guys, it feels like in some ways, despite our focus on traditional markets, if you will, public markets, we are talking a lot about the prediction markets. And there was an interesting story that caught our attention. This has to do with Polymarket updating its rules to clarify that certain kinds of trades are prohibited, including acting on stolen confidential information or wagering using illegal tips. You feel like, yeah, of course it should be this way, but nonetheless, they got to come out and say it, Tim.
Look, these prediction markets are trying to figure out how to make their platforms not just appeal to more people, but also less so the target from and of regulators and lawmakers. Axios also reporting this afternoon that Kalshi plans to block athletes, coaches, and officials from betting on their sports and block political candidates from trading on their campaigns. I expect we're going to hear more and more from these companies as they try to tamp down on.
But how do they do this? I mean, because there's been so much speculation, and particularly when it comes to some of these prop bets in sports and the idea of who is really behind some of those bets here. I mean, let's face it, some of those athletes are also, actually, ambassadors for these brands as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, you can ban athletes, you can ban politicians as well. But you think about some of the insider activity that's been alleged when it comes to some of these platforms. I mean, it also extends to geopolitics and war as well. So it feels like when you're in these sort of situations, it's sort of whack-a-mole. You're not going to be able to sort of police everything, but at least the companies, coming up and making some sort of stand here. The enforcement's still a question.
All right. Well, it's certainly an important topic already this year, and maybe tomorrow we can talk about Romaine's luxury ride and how he gets to work. So that's kind of a deep tease, perhaps.
I'm his driver.
Are
Lucky
you?
you.
On the back
You signed an NDA then, that means.
It's actually where we discuss the whole show, and he kind of reads me in.
Tim, you said too much. Whatever happens in the Maybach stays in the Maybach.
I thought it was on the back of his bicycle. That's how he gets to work.
Oh.